So it doesn't prove whatsoever that they wanted to kill Ukrainians. What it proves is that there were punitive measures taken against people who were hoarding grain. But it
Okay,
doesn't
so
prove what.
okay, so when you're talking about like, well, the government was in charge of distributing grain, they're not distributing it to the people in rural Ukraine or the North Caucasus because those people are the ones that were. They were not, because there were 3.5 to 4 million people that starved to death there that were having personal food taken from them on a daily basis.
The Second World War against Jewish people.
Do you think that the only way to commit a genocide is to have an industrial level gas chamber style genocide?
No. I mean, but I'm asking why. Why would he not continue going? Why would he stop exactly when the famine ended?
Because he had achieved his goal. He had killed all the people that had the strongest nationalist sentiment. He had effective control over Ukraine in spirit and in ideology.
We are going to be debating the Holodomor. The ins and outs of it. We're going to go into detail the causes, the motivations behind it. How bad was it? Was it a purposeful thing? Was it simply an accident? Who's at fault, if any? There's all sorts of angles to tackle this from, but we're going to let our debaters here lead. I am simply going here to make sure that no one talks over the other, that everyone gets a chance to speak. If I can't understand what you're saying, I will ask for clarification, because if I can't understand what you're saying, likely my audience does not either. And so that will be helpful. I might also ask questions to kind of guide the discussion if it spirals out. But we'll do this until you guys are done. So an hour, 2 hours, we'll see how it goes. But we might, if you both are willing, have audience questions after. So the audience members will call in and can either ask either of you questions. But we'll see how it goes. Are there any questions from either of you before we begin?
Not on my end.
Nope.
Okay. With that, we're going to let console open first. What do you think?
So, when speaking about genocide, intentionality is often the most important thing to prove or to create enough enough of a case to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that there was some sort of intentionality behind the killing of a group. Not only does there have to be intentionality, but it has to be a specific kind of group. So nationality, ethnic groups, religions, racial groups. For this debate, it seems like my opponent here has a standard that we need to see something that proves the intent in order for him to change his mind. Now, when we talk about genocide, there's multiple different ways to prove this intent. We can look at functionality or intentionality, right? When people talk about the Holocaust, was it a functional thing? Like, oh, well, was this a bottom-up plan? You know, they wanted to get rid of the Jews, but was it because did they put them into this industrial style, death camps so that they could do that? Or was it an intentional thing from the very beginning? It was the grand plan from the very beginning. This is a legitimate debate, but nobody questions whether or not it was a genocide, right? There was intentionality to kill a specific group of people. I'm going to be here today to prove that there was intentionality, to prove that there was a distinct character to the treatment of Ukrainians, not just in Ukraine, but in other regions of Russia during the Holodomor. And I'll go ahead and let Nonsmoker go.
Nonsmoker, you're up.
Hey, all right, yeah. So, I mean, it's tough to say where to go with the opener, but I'll try to keep it brief. Yeah, my core argument is very simple, straightforward, and to the point, which is maybe it might to make things perfectly clear. I'm going to outline a couple things that my argument is not. So, and it actually sort of contradicts some of the stuff Wick said. But to begin with, my argument is not that the Holodomor did not happen. My argument is not that Soviet collectivization didn't cause the famine. I believe the Holodomor absolutely happened, 100%. It's historical fact. There's no dispute of that whatsoever. I also believe that it was caused largely in part due to Soviet collectivization policy and the massive failures of such. What I intend to argue, rather, is more along the lines of what Sansel was talking about, i.e., whether or not it was a genocide, which really hinges on the premise of whether or not there was intent. And that really isn't, as Sansel kind of insinuated, that really isn't my precise definition. That's actually the definition of the UN in the Genocide Convention. Anybody can Google it right now and look at Article 2, the prelude to which, or the beginning of which, really says, in the present convention, genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent. So there's just no proof of intent. And that's the entire argument that I really want to make. But in a bigger way, and I'll make this really quick, I think that even though we are arguing about the Holodomor and whether or not it was a genocide, for me, this topic really stretches into a lot of the discourse about tankies, MLs, communism, and all that stuff online in general. So I'd be interested in having that discussion as well, but wherever we go, I'm pretty open to whatever.
Okay. That, I guess we'll start off with a response from Console. But yes, if this tends to go beyond the scope of the Holodomor and into general imperialism, talking about socialism, communism, capitalism, etc., that's fine. But for at least the beginning of this, let's stay on the Holodomor. Is that okay? Good for everyone? Cool. Okay, Console, what you got?
Yeah, so I have a paper here. I'm going to just go ahead and quote one quick paragraph from it, if you don't mind. According to documented correspondence between Stalin and his closest circle in the summer of 1932, Stalin stated that a massive Ukrainian resistance front had been formed from ordinary Ukrainian peasants. In particular, he affirmed that they had refused to deliver agricultural goods to the state, which were required to supply food for Soviet cities and export. Let us emphasize that the issue of the Ukrainian peasantry was highly crucial for Stalin, since the peasantry was the driving force behind the nationalist movement. Therefore, destroying the Ukrainian peasants meant destroying the most strong nationalist force capable of challenging the Soviet leadership. Stalin had written to his close associate, Lazar Kaganovich, I hope I said that right, that we are at risk of losing Ukraine, referring to the fact that Ukrainian leadership is riddled with nationalist and foreign agents. Now, after this, what Stalin did was to dispatch a whole bunch of groups, including the famous Molotov of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, over to Ukraine and the North Caucasus. In particular, let me make sure I'm going to say this the correct region here, because there were a bunch of regions that were affected by the Kuban. The Kuban region, which is directly across the Sea of Azov from mainland Ukraine, where Mariupol is. So when we look at where he sent these agents, where he sent these people from the NKVD, the secret police of the early Soviet Union, they were all places that had majority or extremely high concentrations of Ukrainian citizens. When we look at the impacts of collectivization from other regions of the USSR, in particular in Russia, where there were high concentrations of Russian ethnic people, the policies of collectivization were not only not implemented at the same level, meaning there were more private farms, but the punitive actions were not taken out nearly as strong as in the specific regions of Ukrainian ethnic majority. So I guess, like, if that isn't enough just on at the beginning here for us to say that there was some attempts to destroy the Ukrainian people, a national group, in whole or in part, I don't know how we can go forward with the debate if we can't agree that that was at least genocidal in concept.
I guess we won't go much further then, because there's no way I could interpret that as genocidal. I mean, unless so I hope I'm understanding your argument correctly. And also, and I hate to be like this, I'm just out of curiosity. I want to know where that source is from. I'm not denying it because obviously it pulls
100%. I'll go
from.
ahead and link it.
Yeah, if you
w-
could.
I can do it in our little private chat here. 1 second. I have like 15 windows open with a bunch of things. Let me see here. So this is
But,
going to be on
So
page the
just while he
bottom of
does
page.
that,
Oh,
just
Right,
for
right,
my
right.
edification,
Yeah.
can you, Nonsmoker, specify what about what Sansol just said is in dispute? So, you said in your opening that you don't deny the Holodomor occurred, there's a mass starvation, and you also don't deny that it was due to at least in part, to the actions of the uh, uh, communists at the time, the Soviets at the time. So at least to me, what is the dispute then? Like, what is Sansol saying that you take umbrage with or issue with?
So to clarify, Sansol's point just now, as far as I understand it, is that he, or his source rather, has evidence that Stalin was concerned about nationalist elements within Ukraine, and that, at least in part as a response to that, Stalin dispatched members of the party to certain places of Ukraine, and there were punitive measures taken against peasants in Ukraine, thus proving the fact that the broader famine was obviously a targeted genocide against Ukrainians.
just
To
to be
me,
ultra clear, I didn't just
yeah,
say to Ukraine. I said to places where Ukrainian ethnic minorities, or I'm saying ethnic minorities, ethnic Ukrainians were either in high or majority concentrations in that area, which is why I specifically brought up the. I'm gonna have to bring up the because I'm not familiar with this area. Not Kabul, because that's another place.
It
1 second.
couples different.
Yeah, Kuban, which is directly across the Sea of Azov, which had a high concentration of both Ukrainian and Cossack ethnic people.
right. So not to be a pain in the ass, I don't know if that's a major distinction. Ukraine and places where the Ukrainian ethnicity is the dominant group, but regardless,
Why is
uh,
that not? Why? Because if it was just in Ukraine, you could make an argument. Okay,
it's
well, this
division-wide.
nationalist group
Yeah,
right here in this one country is the threat. However, we're looking at not just the ethnicity within the borders of the Ukrainian SSR. We're looking at the Ukrainian population outside of those borders. How could a nationalist group outside of those borders, which isn't even able to assist, they're across an entire sea. How is that group of people relevant to the same kind of nationalist movement that's brewing inside of Ukraine proper?
right. I understand the distinction you're making. Okay, so in the case of the evidence Sansol just provided, to me, that's not at all sufficient evidence about the broader trend of the famine whatsoever. What it does reflect, and it's actually something that I will agree with Sansol on, just like most scholars do, that Stalin had a very, serious concern about Ukrainian nationalism. Was that justified? Was it a reasonable concern? That's a whole nother discussion. I would argue that it wasn't. I don't know to what extent Ukrainian nationalism was a major threat to the stability of the Soviet Union at the time. I actually don't even have enough information on that to say one way or the other. But what I think is still clear, at least to me, is that it doesn't indicate that Stalin had this intent to starve Ukrainian peasants with this famine, to weaponize the famine or weaponize hunger in a way often described among other scholars of the subject. So, Sansel, I mean, you have evidence, what sounds like evidence, that Stalin wanted to exercise punitive measures against Ukrainians in these given regions. Do you think that there's any connection between that and the famine as a genocide? In other words, does that demonstrate that Stalin was intentionally trying to starve Ukrainians in order to destroy the Ukrainian nation, people, state, whatever.
So I can list a couple of things that they did specifically as a means by which to destroy. Again, we both agree on the Convention of Genocide as laid out by the UN, which is the definition that we're going to be using here. A genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. As such, killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. It never says what the reason has to be. It says that there is an intention to kill people.
No, it does say what the reason is, dude. It says intent to destroy or in part a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. That would be the reason. But with all of the things,
The reason is just to destroy them?
be quick.
Wait, hold on. I need to
gotta
understand
Hold on,
this really
stop.
quick.
Stop.
Yep.
Yeah.
Can you
This was the
clarify
problem
what
with the-
what your so you have a problem on the definition. As
Well-
Sansa laid it out, you need an intent to destroy, that you don't need a specific reason other than to destroy a specific group. Why does your contention with that definition?
I mean, I think intent and reason are kind of synonymous, but I think the point I was trying to make maybe more importantly, is when you go through Article 2, all the points, all the bullet points, A, B, C, D, and E, none of those are covered. None of those cover what Sonsol's source described as actions taken by Stalin against Ukrainians.
You interrupted me before I even got to list off the 4 or 5 things that are listed.
Sorry, go ahead.
All right. But also the idea that
Let's start
intention.
with one.
Yeah, I just want to like lay out really quick. The idea that intention and reason are exactly the same thing is ludicrous. I can rob a bank for multiple different reasons, but I still intend on robbing the bank. I can rob the bank because I have a sick mother who has cancer, and I want to make sure that I have enough money to get her, medications and all that stuff. Or I could rob it because I'm a greedy bastard, but that doesn't change that I intended to rob
Those are
a
all
bank.
reasons.
The-
But go on. Just clear their ball.
What do you mean? Yeah, there are 2 reasons that I just laid out, but both of them intend on robbing a bank. So intent and reason are 2 different things.
Your intention for robbing the bank would be the reasons you're giving. Intention, the way they're using it in the definition, is synonymous with reason. They're saying you need to have intent to do X. Your reasoning for, in the case of the genocide, is you have this intention or reason. Your reason for doing it is the destruction of a national, ethnical, racial, religious group.
That
I
the
don't
reasons
understand
for the Holocaust and the Rwandan genocide were exactly the same
What?
because they were both genocides. They both intended to kill a bunch of people.
Okay. See,
However, they
sort of
both
what-
had different reasons.
So look, we're not talking about the Holocaust or the Rwandan genocide and how.
But
they're
we're
different.
talking about
Yeah,
genocide,
Stop,
and so
one at a
these are
time.
relevant.
One at a time. One at a time.
Go ahead.
Would it be helpful if I simply read out the definition of reason and read out the definition of intent? Is that something that'd be helpful to you?
No, because
don't know if
this
it
is
matters that much, but if you
the reason it
feel
doesn't
the need
matter to you,
clarify,
but you
go ahead.
continue to fight on it is because this is your only way of like fighting back against the
It's
idea that there
really
was an
not. We haven't
intentional
even gotten
idea.
into the meat of the argument. I just feel like you're saying, you just said that the Genocide Convention mentions that you need to have intent, but it doesn't say that you need to have reason. And
Can you
so to
find
me, I
me
don't
like
understand
anywhere in the
what that process
Convention
means.
on Genocide what reasons are legitimate causes for calling something a genocide, or
Okay,
is it only
I
talk
mean,
about the intents to destroy
dude,
these groups?
this is like a stupid thing to get stuck on. I'm fine moving past it. But
Okay.
just to clarify my last position, when we're saying reasons, like when you mean reason as in why would you go and do something, right? I assume that's what you mean by reason.
And
Like
why you do a thing you do?
the motivation, right? So Article 2 mentions for something to fall under the category of genocide, the perpetrator, supposed accused perpetrator, needs to have demonstrated that they had the intent to destroy in whole or in part national, ethnical, racial, religious groups, and that they took one of those 4 actions, right? So that would be the reason, I would think. that they gave for actions taken. I think, or I thought the confusion might have been on your part, Sansol, that what they're implying is that as long as one can show that the perpetrator did that thing, it doesn't matter why they actually did it. It just is proof that they committed genocide because they did the act. When that's not at all what the convention is saying. The convention is saying that you need to have demonstrated intent.
This is,
So,
you know what?
again, I've read this
I don't.
before, and I know I'm the
Yeah.
moderator here, but just for clarity's sake.
I need to
So,
know if I'm like crazy, Wick. So
okay,
please.
you are crazy, but not for this reason. Okay. So when it's speaking, at least in legalistic terms, of intent, did you mean to do it or did you do it on accident? It's the difference between manslaughter and murder. Manslaughter, you don't intend to kill someone, but you do so anyway based on your action. When it talks
Exactly.
about this in the accord, what it's saying is this can't be the result of an accident. It couldn't be like, okay, we just mismanaged, mishandled the policies and it accidentally happened.
Right.
You have to demonstrate that they, by whatever actions they took, they intended to destroy, kill, etc. That is what it's talking about.
Right. That's exactly what I'm trying to say. Maybe we're just getting confused, but okay, continue, Sansol.
Yeah, sure. So here are, it lists a couple of the regions here, but I'll go over the North Caucasus, which is where Kuban is, and the Ukrainian SSRs, right? Kuban, as part of the North Caucasus, was the first region where punitive measures against peasant sabotage was introduced, including the system of blacklisting, extraction of agricultural products, including grain and other foodstuffs. Borders were closed to prevent starving peasants from traveling outside of Kuban, as well as to neighboring autonomous republics in the North Caucasus. In the Ukrainian SSR, all available grain funds, including seed reserves, were confiscated from collective farms that did not meet their grain quotas. Fines in kind, in many cases, confiscation of all foodstuffs were widely implemented. The most extensive practice of blacklisting was implemented, covering the whole territory of the Ukrainian SSR and targeting not only collective and state farms, but also entire villages and districts, and borders were closed to prevent peasants from traveling in search of food and to restrict peasant movements within the Ukrainian SSR. These are the only two regions that implemented any kind during this entire famine, the entire range from 1931 to 1933. These are the only two regions that had specific restrictions on the movement out, so you couldn't even leave to get food, whereas in other areas that were either Russian or other ethnic groups that were not Ukrainian, they were fully within their right to not only go to other regions or other countries, they were free to go to the cities where there might be food. In Ukraine, where there was food in the cities to a greater degree than there was in the countryside, you couldn't even go to the cities. You were turned around and told to go back and starve at your house. So, I mean, these are the only two regions where these policies were implemented in wide force. Did none of these policies right here imply any intent? Or were these accidents
They
as
imply
well?
intent of something, absolutely. They don't imply an intent of genociding the Ukrainian people. And there's a few arguments for that. The first one is there were punitive measures taken against Kazakhs and Russians all throughout the Soviet Union during the famine. It was not just Ukrainians who were punished. But one example, and I knew this would come up, it comes up every time the Holodomor is discussed, is the restriction of movement of peasants. And there's an obvious, cruelty to that. The idea that, these peasants were unable to leave their villages where there was lack of food and they were forced to just, remain there where they were starving. And that's often, considered the smoking gun. In fact, the source is actually a document from Stalin titled Preventing the Mass Exodus of Peasants Who Are Starving. It's from January 22nd, 1933. The thing is, though, that document was actually produced by Stalin and the Politburo for a couple reasons. The main reason was to prevent the spread of disease. So I can quote Stephen Kotkin, who wrote the book Stalin Waiting for Hitler. The decree, in any case, was consumed with forming local detachments to enforce a draconian decree on January 22nd, 1933, ordering interdiction of peasant flight from grain-growing regions and blaming local authorities for allowing an exodus, which helped spread epidemics and became a weapon for discrediting regime policies. So, in the case of that particular policy, there was actually a practical reason for it. But what's interesting is that when you look at the statement made by Stalin himself, he actually mentions that part of his motivation is that there is concern of nationalists among Ukraine. He doesn't actually use those terms, but essentially Ukrainian nationalists who may be in cahoots with Polish forces who are trying to undermine the Soviet Union. An advisor to Stalin actually replied that most of the people who left their towns were not Ukrainian nationalists. They were people who were actually trying to find work to make money to, of course, buy bread and feed their families. So what all of this proves is A, Stalin was an extremely paranoid person, very worried about his authority being undermined. B, that none of these people actually were nationalists. And C, that this policy did have a practical dimension to it, although it was rather cruel. But D, and this is probably the most important part, there's no indication whatsoever that Stalin restricted the movement of peasants simply to make sure as many of them could die as possible, thus demonstrating that he wanted to commit a genocide, nor is there any evidence that it, quote unquote, as often Ukrainian sources claim, it broke the Ukrainian spirit and prevented any sort of nationalism from spreading. Because despite the famine, Ukrainian nationalism was, an extremely widespread phenomena for decades after the fact. In fact, the famine itself probably did more to promote Ukrainian nationalism than break the Ukrainian spirit in any way. So there's just no proof that A, Stalin wanted to kill off as many Ukrainians as he could, or B, that he wanted to, quote unquote, crush the Ukrainian soul or anything like that.
Sure. In none of any of the now about 10 to 12 articles, scholarly articles that I've read, has any percentage of the what's the technical term? The excess deaths in Ukraine or in the other regions of the famine, whether it's in Russia or in Ukraine or in the North Caucasus, did they assign any percentage to widespread infectious disease? I find it really hard to believe that we're going to take the word of one decree saying, "Oh, well, we're just trying to stop the spread of disease," for this to be legitimate. Like, I don't know where that comes
So
from.
there's a lot of sources actually about the spread of disease in Ukraine as a result of the famine. In fact, that's why a big part of why the order came out
So
was
you're
because
telling me that a bunch of people were starving to death and they got I let you talk for a very long time, and I thought
I'm
we could
just
just, like,
trying to
have a
answer your
conversation.
point, and you're not letting me
Well,
give you
I wanna ask a clarifying
Ask
question
your
to what you just
question
said.
quick, and then we're gonna give
Yeah, so
Spoker
you're
some space to
saying
answer your question. So you can't
yeah,
interrupt him again after this. Go ahead.
okay. So you're telling me that a bunch of people were starving to death, and then some of them were sick. So then they were going to say, okay, well, you can't go anywhere to get, medical help or food, which might help with the fact that you're starving to death. You're actually just going to go home and starve to death. And we're not going to, think that, oh, well, it was just an accident that all these people starved to death after they were turned away from the borders or turned away from the cities themselves.
Well, what I'm saying is that in an effort to stop communicable disease, they quarantined people.
I'm sorry, say it again.
Is your argument that these were quarantines then?
Well, okay, to be fair, and let me be very specific, it wasn't a quarantine in the way that we think about it in 2023. It wasn't like shelter in place, nobody's allowed to leave their house. But what Stalin and the Soviets wanted to do, specifically to prevent communicable disease from spreading, which there are many sources of the fact that it did during the famine, to prevent it from spreading out of these regions, they wanted sick peasants who were more susceptible to illness to not be around non-sick peasants who were also starving and equally susceptible to spread more disease, resulting in more deaths.
I'm So are we saying that the primary reason that they restricted movement was because of infectious disease, or was it because of the I'm trying to figure out which one of these things you think is the primary thing, because you talked about infectious disease. I find that very hard to believe that there was some massive infectious disease that was going around, even though like in the dozens of articles, the 10 or so sources that I have up, that none of these things are going to mention infectious disease being a major player in the amount of deaths in the Holodomor, that it was specifically relegated to places where only ethnic Ukrainians were, where the harshest border restrictions were. Can you please explain to me that, or was the border restrictions primarily because of the paranoia from Stalin, which you also mentioned?
They're both equally related to the actual decree itself. But you don't have to take my word for it with disease. It's a well-documented fact. Stephen Kotkin wrote an
Was it
entire
in?
book. Okay.
I have a quick question. Was it infectious disease, or was this disease as a result of people's immune systems being compromised by the simple fact that they had not eaten in 6 months?
The two are not mutually exclusive. You can be more susceptible to infectious or communicable disease as a result of starvation.
Think that the Russians might have thought, well, we have all these people that are starving to death. They have a bunch of infectious disease now because their immune systems are completely compromised as a result of them, not having any food as a result of us taking all of their food. Maybe the fact that we're taking all of their food away is killing them, and therefore we should do, maybe something else besides keeping them all in their cities and quarantining them, or maybe we should do something else.
Yeah, I think there's something else they should have done would have been provide aid, which, although they didn't provide sufficient aid, they did provide aid. There's evidence that they
They
increased the
provided aid in the first half of 1932, and they stopped providing aid until the
that's
second
not
half
true at
of
all. That's not true at all. Do you have a
1933.
source for that they didn't provide any aid in 1933?
I can show you sources that show that there were the overwhelming majority of the landmass of
That they
Ukraine
didn't
was
provide any
completely. Hold
aid?
on, I'm yes, because the all these towns, all these regions, all these districts were on the blackboards or the blacklist, which means that they were not eligible for any amount of aid, any amount of resources, or any amount of trade with the broader USSR, and certainly not with anyone from outside of the borders of the USSR.
Yeah, there is. I mean, I need to know a source on that because I'm super confident that there's zero proof whatsoever that the Soviet Union provided no aid to Ukraine in the second half of 1932 or 1933. In fact, all evidence is to the contrary. And not only did they provide aid, this is once again Kotkin talking about the reduction of quotas. Um, in September 1932, back from his 3-month holiday, Stalin quietly softened his August 7th law. No death penalty for theft of tiny amounts of grain, just sentences of 10 years. Quotas had been reduced for Ukraine in 1932, just like skipping around there.
So
Stalin
just to
actually,
be clear, it was it was death penalty, and he reduced it to only 10 years.
yes,
Okay.
which again, look, it puts me in a weird position because I don't agree with the way that Stalin handled the famine whatsoever. I think it's an obvious sign of an extremely callous and in many ways, inhumane way of dealing with an obvious crisis. But in no way does it indicate that Stalin wanted as many people to die as possible. You can definitely argue, in fact, the scholarship is pretty much across the board in agreement that he didn't do enough to help the Ukrainians or the Russians or the Kazakhs for that matter. But the scholarship also agrees that there were attempts made to reduce the effects of the famine. There was, emergency grain provided to people, quotas were lowered, party officials were fired, sentences were reduced. In fact, this limiting of peasants' movements, even though it looks bad, and I understand a lot of the argument against that. It actually was an attempt to reduce the severity of the impact of disease on the people who were starving across Ukraine. So, I mean, all of this is a sign that Stalin didn't want the famine to be as bad as it was, while also not wanting to acknowledge his own failures and the failures of the party.
Okay. Do you know what the blacklists were during the Holodomor?
Yes.
Okay. Do you? So we both agree that
You,
For my
blacklist.
audience, can one of you explain it?
Yeah, I was
yeah,
just about
I was
to.
going to say, Sansa, why don't you
Yeah.
give
So
your, yeah.
the blacklists were any it could be either a town, a district, or a region could be blacklisted as a result of not meeting grain quotas, for not paying the meat tax, which was if you didn't meet your grain quota, then you had to pay the difference in all of your livestock. So if you didn't produce these things, then you would go onto the blacklist. That means that you are essentially cut off from engaging in any economy in the entire world, including the economy of your own socialist, socialist Soviet Union. So this includes any amount of supplies down to matches, so that they could matches and kerosene, so that they could cook their food. So even if they were able to get food, they wouldn't be able to cook it because they didn't have the supplies available to make a fire. So yes, if there was any aid at all, any region that was blacklisted would not be eligible for any of the aid.
Okay. That's the definition of blacklist, sure. Can you, do you know where the origin of the blacklists come from? Like who was responsible for, implementing that policy?
What relevance does that have to the fact that they did this, and you said that everyone was getting all of this aid but still starving to death, when there were
Because
entire
the
regions,
burden,
including almost the entirety of
yeah.
Ukraine, on the blacklist?
The reason it matters is because your overall argument, at least as far as I know, is that there is evidence of a Soviet policy or various Soviet policies which are designed to purposely make sure Ukrainians suffered the brunt of the starvation and death and misery, and that this piece of evidence, the blacklist in particular, is one of your smoking guns that Stalin and the party wanted to purposely make sure that Ukrainians in particular suffered more than other groups. Is that correct? Is that an
Uh,
fair assessment?
yes, I believe so.
Okay, so
I kind of
the
missed
reason
the
it matters
second
is
sentence there,
because
but
the reason it matters is because you would have to tell me, and obviously I have a response. Maybe I should just say this, that the blacklists actually came from the Ukrainian Sovnarkom, right, or the Central Committee. They blacklisted multiple villages in an effort to, appease Stalin and try to maintain grain quotas. Because, as a matter of fact, during this famine, there were many Ukrainians who were, understandably, I'm not saying this is a bad thing, trying to undermine the collectivization effort in an attempt to feed themselves. So, this policy, although brutal and horrible, is not a sign whatsoever that Stalin and the party wanted to kill Ukrainians just to kill them. It's something that happened as a punitive measure against this group, which was unfair and wrong, but it doesn't indicate whatsoever that they wanted to kill off Ukrainians just for the sake of, reducing Ukrainian nationalism or, purifying the Soviet Union or something like that.
okay. So you're telling me that the Ukrainian Soviet authorities were the ones that created this. Who did they answer to?
Well, it's not actually. So, despite what most people think, the Soviet government is not designed such that Stalin literally is at a big switchboard and just does everything. It's a complicated system, and many of the decisions taken by the Ukrainian SSR and the Central Committee there were responsible for the famine's conditions being so bad. Now, the truth is, they were acting to appease Stalin, right? It wasn't like they were doing it just on their own
Why did
accord,
they
just for the
want to
hell of it.
appease Stalin?
Because
Because the
everybody in
previous
the
people, because
right,
the previous group of
dude.
leaders at the
So
Ukrainian
I can
SSR.
answer.
Hold on,
Hey,
I'm
we
sorry.
got we got to
Every
go one
single
at a
time
time.
every single time.
You
I
just
say
jumped
one
in the
thing,
middle of
Stop.
you
thing.
go
Both of
on
us
a
are correct.
5-minute long like speech about it, and I just want to
both
fucking
of
have
you.
a conversation.
Both of you. We're gonna let Sansel make his point, and then you can respond, non-smoker. Sansel, make your point, and then non-smoker, go ahead.
Okay, so the Ukrainian SSR, he's not even listening right now because he's talking, but the Ukrainian SSR did have new leadership in the second half of 1932. This is true. Why did they have a new group? Because the people that asked for help or wrote letters to Stalin from the Ukrainian SSR, there was a purge, yes, in the middle of 1932 of Ukrainian SSR people who either were demoted, sent to gulags, or outright killed. Yes, this was one of the first purges.
Who were they?
Do I have to have a list
You
of
should
all
know
of their
some names
names?
if you're going to make that claim. That's a major claim that you're
I
saying.
can find you. I can go through all of my sources. I can control
Tell
F
me,
them.
who
But
was
instead
it
of,
from the
but
Ukrainian
do you?
Central
Okay,
Committee
I
that
want
was
to
moved
like know one
asking
thing
for
before I go through and like control F on all of my sources for this one. Do we agree that Stalin purged people that disagreed with him or that he saw as going against his wishes on policy?
Stalin, of course, purged people as a ruler all the time for disagreeing with him.
Then
But
why are you acting
okay,
so
I fucking
incredulous?
finished, dude. This is ridiculous. Wick. The guy won't let me answer a point without talking over
If
me.
we
It's
look
like,
at the
Okay,
speaking time in this debate, you have spoken way more.
You have asked
I'll
him
let
a
him talk.
question. Sansel, you've
I'll let
asked
him
him a
talk.
question. You've got to give him a chance to answer the question. And I will repeat the question for my audience. Did Stalin purge dissident leaders or leaders who displeased or leaders who failed to obey sufficiently, etc.? Was purging, and by purging it means usually killing them, was that a part of Stalin's modus operandi? Yes or no?
Yes, Stalin did purge officials all the time. What I'm disputing is the idea that Stalin purged officials from the Ukrainian Central Committee who were asking for help, thus as a means to make the famine worse in the Ukraine.
Okay, what's your evidence that they did that, Sansel?
I'm sorry. I have like 50 things. I didn't think that
Okay,
this
while
would be something
Sansel's
that's in. Yeah, I didn't think this one
okay,
would be in
Sansel,
fucking
gather
contention that there was a
gather
purge.
gather
So
that. Let me ask while he is doing so, if he can give you a list or sufficient evidence that yes, that the people who previously had ran this specific region, I'm not sure the exact term for it, the SSR, I believe, of Ukraine, if they were purged due to disobedience, failure to meet the standards, etc., would this be at least sufficient evidence to you that there might have been one of the motivations for the new Ukrainian leadership cracking down so hard was an attempt to not get purged by Stalin?
Wait, I'm sorry. Could you just repeat the very last part of that question?
Sure.
I understood the whole
No,
framing.
that's
of it.
fine. In order to not get purged, like their predecessors did, they perhaps engaged in very draconian policies that they otherwise would not have had the previous group not been purged.
Honestly, I'm not even against admitting that it's entirely possible that part of the reason to appease Stalin is to avoid getting purged, sure. But I would argue back to that a bigger motivator would probably be that they wanted to move up in the party bureaucracy through high performance. I mean, it just stands to reason. Like, yes, there were purges in the Soviet Union committed by Stalin and under Stalin. In fact, many people were purged after the Holodomor in the like around the 1936-37 time period, including some of the members of the Central Committee of the Ukrainian SSR. But which would also probably disprove Sonsol's point that even if he could find a source that said Stalin got rid of these people because they were less, willing to go along with what he wanted and put in other people that he liked more, well, he killed all of not all of them, but many of the people who were put in place after the sacking in 1932. But yeah, I think the Soviet bureaucracy was structured in a way that advancement in the party relied on being dishonest. It was like a pretty much universal feature in the system that people wanted to lie about the performance of industrialization. Sorry, I just got a stupid chat thing. You know, lie about basically the achievements of their particular committee, right, to try and advance. And I think that was the main reason, and sometimes a very dogmatic adherence to, Marxist-Leninist doctrine, and just this overwhelming belief that everything had to be done a certain way in order to be truly communist. I think that those were just as much, if not more, motivators to lie than the fear of getting purged.
Okay. I'm not gonna lie. Of the like 20 links that I have open right now, it's gonna be really hard to find exactly the thing that I read just about 30 minutes ago. This isn't really that important, and I don't want to like sit here and control F on 20 tabs while he gets to spout out more stuff to muddy the waters, because this ultimately isn't that important. Ultimately, like, I would like to hear like some like explanation for the other parts of this argument that we've been talking about. Why is it that the regions that had the harshest punitive measures imposed on them were the places that had overwhelmingly high Ukrainian ethnic populations? Why is it that the precursor to this was Stalin, in that quote that I read at the beginning of this, talking about Ukrainian nationalism being a huge problem, and that we're in danger of losing Ukraine, and we have to do something to stop it. Subsequently, increasing all of these punitive measures, sending out his top agents, again, Molotov, one of the most infamous people in Stalin's regime, why are we discounting all of these things as intention to snuff out Ukrainian nationalism by means of killing as many Ukrainian peasants as possible?
I mean, admittedly, I feel like I didn't quite catch every single point you just made, but I think I get the gist of it. The
Repeat it back
reason,
to me, because if there's something important,
okay,
I want
yeah,
to.
maybe
Yeah.
you could just run through those. So, which things do you want me to respond to in specifically?
I want to know why it was that the harshest punitive measures happened in areas where there were the highest concentrations of Ukrainian ethnic people. Why is it that these measures were implemented immediately after Stalin, in letters and in telegrams to his officers, said that we are in danger of losing Ukraine? Ukraine nationalist sentiment is strongest in the peasant class, right? And subsequently, the overwhelming majority of the deaths that happened as a result of during the Holodomor were of Ukrainian peasants, directly as a result of all of these policies. Why did it not happen in the cities where the workers, the proletariat, were, only where the peasants were?
Well, so I'll start back to front. So the main reason it didn't occur in the cities is because the famine mostly affected the countryside where, the food is produced, right? The heaviest hit areas in the Soviet Union were all agricultural places, which just is obvious and makes tons of sense on its face, right? The places that are most reliant on the production of food are going to suffer the most during a famine. Second to that, in
Wait,
terms of the
that's
harshest, okay, so
no. I missed. I must have missed something. Can you say that again? Because I feel like I heard you say
So you
something
said,
backwards, and I just want to make sure.
you're asking me if I understand correctly, why did the proletariat in the cities in the Soviet Union or in Ukraine not suffer as much as peasants in the countryside? Is that what you're asking me?
Yes.
Okay, so the reason is not because Stalin purposely wanted to target the peasants just for the fuck of it. The reason that the peasants suffer the most in a famine is because they're the ones who are most reliant on the production of food to maintain their livelihood, i.e., they need to obviously produce food to eat. But in many cases, peasants, although many of them were collectivized by the time this happened, many peasants are producing food as a job, and they rely on food for sustenance, food that they produce. So if there's a lack of overall availability of food, and collectivization makes the distribution of food such that food is taken literally away from them, of course they're going to suffer the most, right? Of course they're going to be the people who suffer the brunt of the famine, because they're the most reliant on the production of food for everything, for their
Okay.
own, economic livelihood and to sustain themselves. But the reason that Stalin actually really started to kind of shit his pants was that by 1933, the famine did begin to impact the cities. It actually was one of the last places affected by this. And part of that
Yeah,
is
and that's
because
when they started.
Stalin wanted
Oh,
to
yeah.
wanted to ensure that food networks were such that the cities were able to continue receiving food because the Soviet Union was undergoing industrialization.
Okay, so you're saying that, if I understand you correctly, it wasn't targeting the peasants to take away their food when they were the most reliant on household farms or anything like that. It wasn't targeting the peasants. It was supporting the workers in the cities, and the callous disregard was the reason. Is that what you're saying?
Sort of. Okay, so it's not, to be clear, I'm not saying that Stalin took food from the peasants just to give it to the people in the cities. What I'm saying is there's a famine and a lack of overall food, and Stalin's highest priority was making sure the cities were able to receive adequate food because industrialization was the primary concern of Soviet
If I may
officials.
ask, if that was his primary concern, what policies did he in order to ensure that this happened?
Yeah, to be honest with you, Wick, I would have to probably do some digging to really verify that.
Because
But
I
there's
think that's
lots
going to be the linchpin here. Like, what policies were in place that ensured in Stalin's mind that the cities were taking care of his priority. And if those policies were punitive in nature towards the farmers in the countryside, etc., I mean that's a thing, right?
Well, no, we're not talking about the punitive measures. That's actually a different argument. We're talking about why the peasants were most drastically impacted versus, I mean, Sansal's question was, why weren't people in the cities affected the same way from the famine, i.e., like, why did they not suffer the same number of starving or dead? And my argument is the fact that due to the nature of collectivization and food distribution, obviously the peasants in this lack of food, were unable to procure food themselves for their own sustenance by skimming off the top or anything like that. There are punishments for doing that. But also, the Soviet Union's primary concern with industrialization was to make sure these food networks reached the cities first and foremost. Now, it's actually a different argument to say that dynamic was intentional to try and punish peasants and help the people in the cities. What I'm suggesting is that they weren't trying to punish peasants so much as they were trying to make sure the cities got the food in time. And the peasants unfortunately suffered from the immediate effects of the famine. But what I can find for you, it's going to take me a second to find it, is that dynamic in which Stalin was mostly concerned about the cities, such that the famine really became a concern of his towards the end because it started to affect the cities. But that might take me a second to find.
Fine. I'm not debating this, so I'll back off and give space to Sansel.
So it wasn't only punitive measures to take all of the grain away. Like, not all of these were just punitive measures. As I've listed out a couple of the policies before, some of these were just taking all of the food, right? So, like, in one of the articles that I have here, first, beginning in January 1932, the districts and collective farms that fulfilled their plans were often forced to continue collecting grain in order to cover the quotas of those who failed to fulfill their procurement targets. Thus, all remaining grain was taken away, even in collective farms with completed quotas. The practice of so-called counterplans was most widespread in the regions lagging behind the collection of grain, such as in the Ukrainian SSR and North Caucasus. Again, the two places that have the highest concentration of Ukrainian ethnic minorities. Although counterplan practice was abolished in January of 1933, this decision came into effect only after the new harvest in summer of 1933. So it wasn't only punitive measures. In addition, like I said earlier, there wasn't just punitive measures taking away their food, because you didn't fulfill your quotas. It was anyone that had food in their homes. They would just walk in and take all of their food.
And
Now,
to be
like,
clear, Sansel, if I may clarify, who were these people who the food was being taken from?
I'm sorry, say that again? Sorry, I have
Which
a spammer in my
groups
chat.
were having their food taken?
The peasants.
The ones who fulfilled their quotas and the ones who didn't?
They took all of the food, even from the ones that filled their quotas. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Console. Can you
What
just
was I
give
saying
me
right before you asked me a question, Wick? Sorry.
I don't know what you were saying right before I asked you the question. Sorry.
Yeah, Console, can you give me a source on the counterplans thing?
Yeah, here you go. Let me go ahead.
I actually can't see the show chat right now. Is there a way that you could like
I'm
tell
just
me the
using I'm
website?
only linking stuff in the
Our group chat that we have.
yeah, our group chat. Yeah.
Okay.
And I'll copy and paste the paragraph here so that you can control F it. Oh shit. Sec.
Gang, while they're doing that and they're looking it up, gang, if you're enjoying this show, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Don't take away all my grain, okay? Right? Distribute all your resources to me, centralize it on me, and I'll make sure that it goes to good use, and I won't purge you. So yeah, super chat if you got them. Throw me some subs on Kick. We're monetized on Kick. Be great. Really appreciate you. Thank you. Cool.
Okay. So the counterplans thing, my only main argument against this is, and I'm not denying that it happened, I'm not denying the veracity of the source, is just that I don't see how this demonstrates whatsoever that there's like that this policy was in any way intended to destroy Ukrainian nationalism or kill Ukrainians. If anything, it sounds like they're trying to adjust the failure of certain collective farms or communities of producing enough grain. So, I mean, do you have proof of the intent one way or the other, or is
Yeah,
this just
actually,
incorrect?
the conclusion of the article that I just linked you. Let me go ahead and find here. We'll scroll down to the conclusion. The 1932 to 1934 famine affected both Soviet Ukraine and the Russian Federation. However, the statement about fairly similar consequences of the famine in both republics is not supported by demographic evidence. First, the relative direct losses are 4 times higher in the Ukrainian SSR than the Russian Federation. Second, the high famine losses in the RSFSR are mainly concentrated in a limited set of regions with relatively small population sizes, while in Ukrainian SSR, the extraordinary levels of mortality due to the famine was observed in a much larger proportion of its territory and population. Third, an important finding in our research is that there is no correspondence between the patterns of geographical distribution of losses between the two places. The highest excess deaths in the holy fuck, trying to say it too fast. In Soviet Ukraine are mostly found in the central forest. Okay, that part's not important to this, but what they're saying is they
Yeah, or
like
Ukrainian
even
died
when
than
you're
Russian.
even when you
Let
are
Sansel finish real quick, and then we'll get to you. I promise. Go ahead, Sansel, finish your
even
point.
when you are I'm losing a word here. Controlling for other factors like, oh well, let's look at this factor, that factor. The ethnic differences in the amount of deaths, right? Whether we account for weather patterns in all these areas, whether we account for which patterns of policies that were out there, all of these things were higher in the areas where there were Ukrainian ethnic people rather than Russian or other ethnic peoples.
Yeah, so I mean, the abstract of the study is actually pretty revealing. I mean, it just says that what they were attempting to prove in the study with the data, which honestly, I mean, is not even something worth disputing whatsoever, is that more Ukrainians died than Russians, and that there was a disproportionate number of Ukrainians who died relative to Russians who died as a result of the famine. But this doesn't whatsoever prove intent or any demonstrate any relationship between policy and a supposed attempt to kill Ukrainians on purpose. What it proves is that more Ukrainians died. And that's not something that I would disagree with. I think all the sources are in agreement on that. But what there is no evidence of, and the whole counterplan argument you didn't really respond to, how does the implementation of counterplans not indicate an attempt to make up for failing collective farms and instead indicate an attempt to try and kill more Ukrainians?
Because the counterplans were mostly given to or mostly implemented in places like the North Caucasus and in the Ukrainian SSR. And you're missing the last sentence there at the end of the abstract. Extremely high losses are mostly found in the regions where repression policies were much more severe than those introduced elsewhere, and for which nationality may be a key factor.
May be a key factor doesn't mean that the authors are definitively arguing that point. And the reason they're not definitively arguing that point is because they don't provide any evidence for that in the article.
How do you know? You've never seen this article. They do present evidence. If you scroll down and you look at the graphs, right?
No, Sanso, the graphs, all of the data prove that more Ukrainians died than Russians.
So
Have you ever read this?
Hold
No,
on,
that's
stop,
not all it
stop,
says.
stop.
Okay, hold on.
Okay,
You
stop.
can't let me,
A
you gotta let
moment,
me
a
respond to
moment,
that.
because I think we could clear this up, okay, with a simple question. So, in the abstract, at the last sentence you read, it says, the more repressive policies were implemented in these regions. Can you, Sansol, point us to which of those policies were implemented in those regions that were not implemented in other regions?
I read out those list of policies near
Okay,
the
so it was
beginning
the
of the debate.
previous policies that you mentioned, such as counterplans. What were a few others?
Yeah, I can find them super
Please,
quick here, really quick.
Find them really quick, just for my audience. And then after you do so, and if that's your claim, then my question to Nonsmoker would be, and please let him read them out before you answer, please. My question to Nonsmoker would be, is that not evidence that they at least had some intentionality to make these regions in specific suffer more than the others?
No, I think it's a much more logical conclusion to reach that punitive measures were taken in certain regions for various reasons, and it had the byproduct of more people dying.
What are those various
There's
reasons?
Sorry.
What were those reasons? If not to make sure that these regions suffered more, what would the reason they would implement these policies in one area be, but not implement them in the others?
Okay, so for example, the counterplans. I mean, it depends on the policy, but for example, the counterplans, they didn't implement counterplans to punish successful farms. That doesn't make any sense. They implemented counterplans to try to have successful farms make up for the failures of unsuccessful ones. So it might be a bad policy and a terrible way to resolve an obvious issue, i.e., some of these farms failing to produce what they're supposed to, and a better solution would have been lowering quotas, et cetera, et cetera. But to me, what this demonstrates is, a sort of stubborn commitment to trying to meet goals of collectivization versus some intentional killing of peasants. Why would you want to kill off your most productive peasants? That doesn't
Because
make
they
any
were
sense.
being rebellious. That would be the reason.
Yes.
But Sansol,
no,
go
but
ahead.
wait,
Like as the quote that I read at the very beginning of this.
Wait.
You have spoken like
Can I
fucking 10
respond?
times more than
First
me.
of all, I'm debating you, not Wick, but I want to respond to Wick's point. So if they were being rebellious, Wick, how is it that they're producing more than all of the other collective farms? If they're meeting these quotas, isn't that a demonstration of them not being rebellious?
No. When I say rebellious, what I mean is they don't want to be under Stalin's Soviet Russia anymore.
So they're doing everything they can to meet the quotas. That's your proof of that?
I don't have proof of that. It's simply another
You're just
reason.
making a guess. You're just saying obviously the most.
Well, you asked why they would. Well, you asked me a question. Why would they do this? Why would they want to kill off their most productive members? That would be a reason, right? If their most productive members were becoming a threat in other ways, they would absolutely.
That's why they did that stuff to the
wait.
kulaks. We all agree. Hold on.
Let me respond.
I just want to ask a question to you, Nonsmoker.
Yeah, question in a second. Let me respond.
No, I'm not gonna. I'm gonna ask it right now. We both agree that the collectivization policies were disastrous, right?
Ridiculous.
They were disastrous because the people who were the most skilled at farming, right, were all labeled as kulaks, and you were either going to join the collective farms or die. Right, that is punishing even if they are the highest productive people. I mean, you can put your hand on your face all you want. You've been talking the majority of the time in this, and you get mad every single time I try and get a word in.
Me like 5 times, and now I'm debating the moderator, who's like obviously biased and on your side. But I want to respond to his point because it's really important. Wick, you just said that in your view, Stalin must have wanted to carry out counterplanning because he didn't think that these peasants were trustworthy and that they have some, resistance to being part of
Not
the
what I
Soviet
claimed.
Union. Okay, can you repeat the claim
Sure.
one more time?
You, again, in the context of why I even said anything, you asked a question. Why would they want to kill off their most productive members? So I listed one possible reason. I am not claiming this is the reason because I am being a moderator here, but that is a possible reason that you, as a ruler of a country, would want to eliminate some other productive members of your countries because they were a threat to your leadership.
So you don't know?
No, I'm a moderator.
Okay, so I can kind of push that aside then altogether because you don't know. And like you said, you're moderator, it's irrelevant. But my bigger question to Sansol would be,
Oh, I'm
maybe he
included again. Okay, cool. What's up?
well, you can, talk to the moderator about that. He felt like he needed to respond to what I was saying.
No, every single time I speak, you get frustrated. So
okay, let him finish his
go ahead.
statement, and then I'm going to give the
Go
time
ahead.
to you, Sansol, and you will have uninterrupted time to ask your questions, do whatever you would like to do. Nonsmoker, finish.
Yeah, really quickly. So, Sansol, maybe you can tell me, why would Stalin want to kill the most productive peasants?
Okay, so as I said at the very beginning of this, what the reason for the Holodomor, especially in the Ukrainian SSR in the North Caucasus, was that there was a nationalist sentiment within the peasantry, at least perceived. I don't know whether this is factually backed up or not. I haven't seen any studies on like what the level of nationalist sentiment were in those areas, but whether or not they had nationalist sentiments doesn't really matter. The Soviet Union, the Central Committee, Stalin, all recognized or perceived this nationalist sentiment within the peasants of the Ukrainian SSR. Why did they kill off all these people? Well, because the Ukrainians were the largest group of people that had nationalist sentiment. They were the largest threat within the Ukrainian or within the USSR. So they had to do something to either bring those people in line or to get rid of them one way or another.
So, if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, the nationalists were also the people who were complying the most with Soviet quotas.
Did I just say that? Wait, what?
So
You asked me what the reasons were, and so I
Yeah.
gave you the
So you're
answer.
saying they weren't nationalists, that Stalin thought they were nationalists with no proof.
I don't
So-
whether they
you don't
were
know
or
either
weren't
way.
nationalists. It doesn't matter.
Well, it does matter because isn't your entire argument that Stalin was trying to target nationalists? So doesn't it matter if they were nationalists or at least if Stalin thought they were?
Targeting an entire like group of people based off of like
But
some
in the
sentiment
case of
is
counter planning, it's not an entire group of people. This policy specifically, in your view, was a target of the most successful collective farms, right?
the collection of all of the policies that were implemented
We're not
across
talking
all
about
of the
policies, we're talking
yeah,
about
no,
this policy.
that's because that's what the argument is. The
But you
collection of
can't
all
make
the
an argument about every policy.
Sansol,
We need to
finish
talk
your
about
I
each one.
absolutely
it
can
might
make
be
an argument about the
helpful.
collection.
It might be helpful because I think we're getting a little off the rails here for Sansol to reiterate his argument concisely, and then we can deal with it.
We can look at the collection of policies that were implemented across the USSR, especially in regards to grain and farming, and we can see that there was a particular targeting of a particular group in those things. While these policies were implemented in places like the Volga region, in places like the oh shit, I can't remember which. It's like the central Russian region that also has a large amount of farming. I can't remember which one it was. Like there were these policies that did apply there, but the places where they were most heavily implemented. Did he just fucking leave? Like,
Okay, while he's gone.
No, I'm here.
While he's gone, well, let me read some super chats because we got some super chats in. That's a good interesting point. And then you can finish your point. Yeah. $5 from Skilltree Gaming to say, does this guy think since there wasn't a written signed plan to kill Jewish people that Hitler didn't try to exterminate Jewish people? $10 from Mark Twain's Revenge to say, why the hell would you starve yourself en masse by not farming well to show defiance? Go ahead.
Did you read the first one? I'm a little
Sure.
confused by that.
Well, it says, does this guy, I'm assuming you, think since there wasn't a written signed plan to kill Jewish people, that Hitler didn't try to exterminate Jewish people?
I mean, look, this will open up a whole nother discussion, but just to answer him, since you brought it up, there's like shitloads of evidence that the and their co-conspirators, Hitler, all of these people had every intention to ethnically cleanse Germany and carry out the extermination of Jews. It's probably one of the most well evidenced, phenomena in history. There's mountains of evidence. There's zero evidence whatsoever that this was Stalin's intention. That's the difference.
What kind of evidence did they bring up when it comes to? I mean, I agree with what you said there. There is a mountain of evidence that the did want to exterminate the Jews, right? But was I've pointed out at the very beginning of this, there are two kinds of ideas of how a genocide can happen. Either functional genocides or intentional, like the intent is just I want to kill as many people as possible, and this is what our plan is from the very beginning, right? Whereas functional will be we don't like this group of people. There's a reason that we don't like this group of people. We're going to get rid of them, right? Ideology versus like why we're doing this because it's like a functional thing.
So, I mean, there were literal speeches from Adolf Hitler talking about the annihilation of the Jews. It's written into the ideology and repeated by its many proponents. Its entire propaganda campaigns were based on the idea of Jews being a, parasitic, problem race of people who needed to be cleansed. Hitler wrote about the annihilation of the Slavs as well and all these other groups. It's like literally the backbone of the entire, you know, political movement. In the case of the Soviet Union, resistance to nationalism does not, in my view, whatsoever, I mean, first of all, compare in terms of being a foundational ideological element. We talked last time we debated about Soviet policies meant to maintain the integrity of national minorities. We could go into language, culture, whatever, all these other things. I will grant you that nationalism became a thorn in the side for Stalin, particularly in Ukraine, more than any other republic. But there's no indication whatsoever that the events of the famine, which were far reaching, although, yes, of course, they impacted Ukraine more severely than other regions, there's no indication that that was an intent or intentional by Stalin and that he wanted to exacerbate that to try to break Ukrainian nationalism. I mean, I think the best evidence for that, just again, not even using like a direct documented source, is the fact that it objectively failed miserably. If anything, it gave the nationalists tons of fuel to try and recruit supporters during the Second World War with the rise of Bandera. I mean, it doesn't stand to reason whatsoever. But I don't know. I mean, if you want to respond to that, or we could go back to your point earlier about all the different policies, because I did have a response to that. I don't know if you want to restate it or hear that now.
I'm not. Just a question for that. If there was an intentionality to target, if it was all about we just want to make sure that we're hitting our grain quotas and we're going to do punitive measures to any group, right? Why were these things not implemented evenly across all of the different regions? Why were these specifically targeted at places like Ukraine and the North Caucasus, right? Like I have a thing right here. One second. Blah 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 blah. Oh shit. It is important to note that Stalin did not target Russian regions for obtaining extra grain after they had eventually archived in full their grain collection plans. By contrast, in the Ukrainian SSR, the period of grain collections was greatly extended, and the seed requisition for the spring sowing campaign was launched while the grain collections still continued. Why is it that the Russian areas were not targeted, but the Ukrainian areas were targeted?
Right. So, I mean, the fact of the matter is, in terms of there's a couple different questions packed into that. So I want to try to get to each thing. The first one, and the most important being, the aspect of targeting. So, in the case of targeting, when you talk about that, you list a whole bunch of policies, each of which has a practical explanation. It might not be one that you find acceptable for one reason or another, but the fact is they were all implemented for a reason. I'd have to go through each policy to respond to each one. Like we already talked about the restriction of peasant movements. But in terms of why these things were, enacted in a way that they affected Ukrainians more, it's actually the same answer as why more Ukrainians died in the famine. The fact is, Ukraine was a region where a majority of the agricultural production took place in the Soviet Union. And in addition, they had a population which was in many ways, as Wick tried to mention before, most against the idea of being not necessarily part of the Soviet Union, but collectivizing to a point where they killed off their own many peasant farmers, not all of them, many of them killed off their livestock in the process of collectivization. There was an exodus from Ukraine at the time. It was a republic that these people for generations had their own farms, right? Some of them very successful, the kulaks, right? Who now were being told, hey, you have to consolidate your entire production with a bunch of other people who might not know what they're doing, some of them imported from other places. So of course there was.
I'm going to ask the question again. I'm going to
Okay.
ask the question again because you didn't answer it. Okay.
Yeah. So
Why is it?
If you let me finish the statement, maybe I will.
You've been talking for like 5 minutes and
Dude,
you
it
haven't
has not
answered the
even
question.
been remotely near 5 minutes. It's
Okay,
like
sorry, I'm being a little
Finish,
hyperbolic, just like you're being
Sonsel.
hyperbolic with
Let
the
him- let
amount
him-
of words you need
Sonsel.
to explain to me why
Sonsel.
all
Sonsel.
of the policies were implemented more strongly in Ukraine and the North Caucasus than in other regions where there were still people who were having these
if you
policies
would
affected
just
against
listen,
them.
I'm answering everything you're saying. It's just you don't like the way that I'm saying it, and I don't know what to tell
I
you
just
about
want a reason.
it. I'm not asking you to, I don't know, appreciate the, the verbosity or something like that. But this is just the way that I need to talk to try to hit everything that you asked me. You asked me several
This is
questions.
one question.
No, it's multiple questions. You asked me, why did these policies target Ukraine? Why did, the impact of that hurt Ukrainians so severely?
No.
Why did?
That's
Okay.
not what the
No,
question is.
let me
The question-
reframe the question. Maybe I need to translate the question here. The question is simply, why did they implement these policies in the Ukrainian regions with the at least an heightened perceived nationalism versus the areas that did not have the Ukrainians?
So can I respond to the question with a question, Sansel?
Absolutely.
So do you think it's possible that there's any answer to that question that could be contradictory to your preconceived conclusion that it had to be the intention that they wanted to kill off Ukrainians? Do you think that there's a practical answer to that, that maybe these policies all served a purpose and maybe this happened to be a region that was full of people who were against being collectivized? Do you think in any way it's possible that there was some other reason for that? Do you really want to know the reason, or do you want me to just tell you, well, it had to be because it was genocide?
Well, if you're saying that the reason that the policies were implemented more strongly in these regions was because of this heightened sense of nationality, I would say no. Is that not what you're saying?
No,
Implying right
no.
there? Okay, then go ahead.
There
Tell
was
me.
a resistance to collectivization, and
Okay.
which was not only because of nationalism. This is what I was trying to say when I talked about small farmers. The reason I was going on that there's a purpose to this. These small farmers, it's not that they're ardent nationalists. It's that they're
They were
farmers
resisting
and they
collective
want to support their
collectiveness.
families with their farm work, and they don't want to be nationalized, or they don't want to be collectivized. So they're going to resist collectivization.
How does so by that logic, because they were resisting collectivization, they're going to implement stronger penalties or punitive measures against those communities in order to bring them into line and make them like collectivization by
Yes.
starving 3.5 to 4 million
No,
Ukrainians.
the starving was a byproduct of
The starving was
failure
a byproduct. It was not because they went into their houses and stole
No,
their personal food. The reason that
the
they
reason
killed their
don't-
livestock, like you mentioned earlier, I let you talk for a long time. The reason that they killed their livestock was not because they just wanted to stick it to the man. If they wanted to kill their livestock, like why would they do that if they were all starving to death, right?
See,
They were killing the reason. Oh my God. I let you talk for a long time. I'm trying not to interrupt anymore.
Like 60 times, dude.
Yes, because you talk for a long time. The reason that they killed their livestock was because there was this meat tax. If you didn't meet your quota, then you have to give us your livestock. Well, if you take all of their grain and all of their personal bread from their homes, what is the only other source of food? The livestock. Why did they kill their livestock? Not to stick it to the man, to feed themselves.
Sansol, the deaths of livestock happened before the Holodomor. The mass killing of livestock started during the early period of collectivization, 1931.
The meat tax that we're talking about here, and the reasons why people were sent to the gulags or killed or, in other ways punished was during the Holodomor. It was, the meat tax was implemented in the second half of 1932, but you can double check me on that.
Yeah, I will go.
Yeah. So essentially, the meat tax was there to quote unquote shore up or meet the quota while still even if you missed your grain quota. But this was their only other source of food because they have been taking all of their grain, taking all of the grain for the people that grow it, right? Not leaving any amount for them, and taking all of the extra food that they could survive off of afterwards. And past that, that's when the last sentence I want to say, past that, the last policy that they implemented, like towards the end of 1932 and at the beginning of 1933, was directly taking food from inside of their homes. This was allegedly to shore up the amount of grain procurement, but we're talking about like a pound of flour. We're talking about any amount of food that they had in their homes. Right? I don't think that in any other situation we would ever look at a situation where you're taking literally every means of eating from someone and say, okay, well, they're just too to know that not letting someone eat for several months is enough to kill them.
I'm not arguing they're too. The discussion about
sorry, I was implying the USSR was not you.
No, I know what you're saying. I'm not. Okay. Sorry, was that Wick?
No, I'm saying it's fine. Go on, Nonsmoker, go.
So, two things. One, the death of livestock absolutely occurred before the Holodomor. The killing off of livestock started during the early part of collectivization. I am scouring my source for that now, but that's 100% true. In terms of the meat tax, the only thing I could find upon a very cursory Google is a Washington Post article, which does not include a source for that and is paywalled. So if
sure,
you can find
real quick,
I'd appreciate that. But the other aspect is the grain procurements, the removal of grain from peasant homes as your evidence that they wanted people to starve. They were taking grain because the government was in charge of distributing it, right? The whole idea was that we can't have during a famine certain people hoarding grain because it's actually going to make it harder to alleviate the famine. So that's not at all a sufficient proof that they wanted A, people to die, or B, specifically Ukrainians to die.
Well, why was it that the majority of the I thought that you were finished there.
Finish, Nonsmoker. Nonsmoker.
Really quick. I know you're on the edge of your seat. So it doesn't prove whatsoever that they wanted to kill Ukrainians. What it proves is that there were punitive measures taken against people who were hoarding grain, which I agree with. And by the way, I don't condone and I think is wrong. Any reasonable person would. But
so when you're talking about the government was in charge of distributing grain, they're not distributing it to the people in rural Ukraine or the North Caucasus because those people are the ones that they were not, because there were 3.5 to 4 million people that starved to death there that were having personal food taken from them on a daily basis. Okay. And for the meat tax thing, I have, it's in the same article that I sent you earlier, November 18th and 20th, 1932, resolutions of the Politburo of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Ukrainian SSR, the CPC of Ukrainian SSR, on measures to strengthen grain procurement that included A, fines in kind against peasants and collective farms that failed to meet the grain quotes, confiscation of meats, 15-month norm, so the amount of that they would be able to produce in 15 months, potatoes and livestock. So not only the meat that they had from the livestock, but also the livestock themselves. And so not only are they taking all of the grain, they're taking all of the meat, all of the potatoes, and all of the livestock. Meanwhile, the people in the rural areas are the ones that are starving to death. The areas that are inside of the cities are not starving to death because all of the food from the rural areas are being taken away and given to areas that are seen as less revolutionary because of like multiple reasons.
Yeah, it's so Sansol, let's not even go by evidence. Let's just go by common sense. If all of the food were taken, literally everybody in the region would have died. There was obviously food available to some people. It was not sufficient, right? The food that was provided to people was provided by the state, and it was woefully insufficient because it would have meant missing out on grain quotas. Towards the end of the famine, Stalin, too little, too late, lowered grain quotas and increased aid. I mean, there's tons of documented evidence of that. But again, in terms of all of the stuff you're describing, this is all very horrible and callous and cold and brutal, but it's meant as a punitive measure against peasants.
The punitive measures were not taken out
let
as
Nonsmoker
strongly.
finish, and then you can respond, please. Nonsmoker.
Yes. No, I can even respond to what Sansol's trying to say. He's trying to say the punitive measures were not taken against groups in places like
to be ultra clear,
Russia.
They were, but they weren't taken in nearly the same amount as in the Ukrainian SSR and the North Caucasus.
Right. So in other words, let's simplify really, really like drastically here. It's a punishment, and more people were punished in Ukraine, or more Ukrainians were punished than Russians or Kazakhs. Okay. So you could view that one of two ways. Either there were more Ukrainians who were doing things to get punished, or that the state was targeting Ukrainians to punish them. Now, my argument and the core of this whole debate really is that I'm trying to say there's no evidence whatsoever that Stalin wanted specifically to punish Ukrainians. There's a lot of evidence, though, that Ukrainians resisted collectivization and were probably doing lots of things to try and get out of Dodge in terms of suffering the effects of this famine. So until I see evidence that, yes, Stalin was specifically, or the Politburo, or even the Soviet Central Committee, that they were trying to carry this out to crush nationalism. Until you can prove that, we're just going to keep coming back to this core issue.
If I may,
I think I just like want to say one thing. I mean, like we can look at intent, and like we said earlier, we can see that there was like a negative feeling towards the Jews in Germany by all of the speeches that were given by Hitler and other leaders. Right? We both agree on that. The really didn't like the Jews. Right? They also didn't like Eastern Europeans or lots of different groups. Now, the Ukrainians were mentioned by Stalin multiple times about how we have to reduce the resistance over there. We have a problem. We are going to lose Ukraine if we don't solve the Ukrainian question. This is what I opened the debate up with by quoting him. I can read those paragraph again. Right? Stalin said that a massive Ukrainian resistance front had been formed from ordinary Ukrainian peasants. Right? What was the second quote here? Referring to the fact that Ukrainian leadership is riddled with nationalists and foreign agents, and we are at risk of losing Ukraine, followed by all of the different policies that were implemented the strongest in Ukraine, like to the point where the Ukrainian peasants were not allowed to enter the cities where there was more food, where they were not allowed to leave so that people could not tell anyone that they're starving to death. If we were to take like a mother and a child, where the mother didn't allow the kid to ever go to school, the mother didn't give the child any food, right? The mother constantly searched through the child's room to see if they had like snuck away any snacks, right? And the child died of starvation. We would never say, well, the mom's just too to feed her child. We would say, hey, this woman starved her child to death.
Okay. Before you answer that, before you respond, $5 from Skill Tree Gaming, and this goes along with his spiel there, so you can answer both at the same time. Since the Soviets killed all the anarchists after the revolution, doesn't that show that they'd be willing to starve the Ukrainians for wanting nationalism?
Well, first of all, I would need proof that they killed every single anarchist. They definitely crushed the anarchist movement. But second of all, no, I don't think it would. All it shows is that the Soviet Union would be willing to take out, in the case of just after the revolution, during a civil war, by the way, that they're willing to take out, brutal measures to ensure political control. But that doesn't necessarily prove any intent to genocide Ukraine. I mean,
Political
honestly,
control by what method?
okay. Well, in the case of following the revolution, outright violence. But in the
I'm
case
talking
of,
about the Holodomor.
no, I know, I'm trying to answer you and the chatter at the same time. I was answering the chatter and you jumped
Yep.
in. So,
I
$5
know, but
and I'll
because we're ignoring the measures that they took to create this more politically homogenous union.
they're not okay. The politically homogenous union is definitely something that the Bolsheviks wanted. There's no denying that. What I'm arguing is that the desire for a politically homogenous union doesn't indicate a desire to genocide Ukraine. Okay, and but you had mentioned a whole bunch of shit about the various policies. Honestly, I'm a little overwhelmed with shit that you had mentioned, and then I got distracted by that question. But let me try to go by memory. So we talked about the Jews and Hitler and the desire to kill Jews, and then that was it. It was Stalin making statements about losing Ukraine. So 1939, January 30th, Hitler's speech, first time he ever describes the annihilation of the Jews to the Reichstag. Okay, very different than a single memo by Stalin expressing concern that because of nationalism and the growing effects of starvation in Ukraine, that
According
we
to the
quote, might
definition of genocide that I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you on this one, because by the definition that you want to go by, the UN definition, not Limkin's definition, not any other historian's definition, but the UN definition, it doesn't require what the reason is, right? It only requires the intent to kill a group of people.
Okay. So in the case of Hitler, annihilation of the Jews, that's intent to want to eliminate a group of people, yeah?
Well, yes.
Okay. Do you not see how that's very different than Stalin
Nazi.
expressing concern about losing Ukraine in a single memo?
If that was the only thing that happened, I would agree. That's not enough to prove intent that all of these people died. It's the actions afterwards. I mean, I can read off, he dispatched to Ukraine in the North Caucasus, Molotov and Kaganovich, I hope I'm saying that right, special plenipotentiaries, where they were tasked with purging and restoring order in local communist groups. They were there to use rigorous methods to compel local communist groups to carry out excessive grain delivery plans. Moreover, reinforcements comprised of activists were deployed from Russia to Ukraine. This group of activists was made up of members of the NKVD, various armed detachments, and police forces who carried out a slew of punitive acts against peasants in order to seize all available wheat, including seed grain, for the subsequent harvest. As a result, it should be argued that the Holodomor was deliberate Stalin's policy, which provided forcefully confiscated food sources, blocking villages and whole regions, prohibiting movement from famine-stricken areas, and forbidding trade in rural places.
Right. So going back to the question, you feel as though the concern about losing Ukraine to nationalism and many of the punitive measures taken is sufficient enough evidence that the punitive measures taken must have been in line with a desire for Stalin to want to eliminate the Ukrainian people or eliminate the Ukrainian nation. Supposedly, these punitive measures were not taken to punish people resisting collectivization, but they were taken to try and crush the Ukrainian spirit. So they were like deliberately being mean. Is that your point, kind of?
They were crushing the Ukrainian spirit by means of killing people and starving them to death, which fits in line with the UN definition of genocide, yes.
So let me ask you this question. Why would Stalin, who you and many people interpret as an absolute ruler, why would Stalin have not continued this after the Holodomor? Why would he have not have cracked down even harder, especially on nationalist groups? Why would he have not started outright killing people? Why would he have not taken any of the measures that, for example, the took during the Second World War against Jewish people?
Do you think that the only way to commit a genocide is to have an industrial level gas chamber style genocide?
No. I mean, but I'm asking why. Why would he not continue going? Why would he stop exactly when the famine ended?
Because Because he had achieved his goal. He had killed all the people that had the strongest nationalist sentiment. He had effective control over Ukraine in spirit and in ideology. At that point, he didn't need to continue doing it, and it would have hurt his broader goal of expanding the USSR, because there wouldn't be anyone left to farm grain. Right? Again, the UN definition of genocide does not require that you have to murder the entirety of an ethnic group, national group, or anything like that. You just have to kill it in whole or in part.
Dude, can you just repeat that last part? Something about his goal of what? Trying to what? With the farming in the USSR?
He didn't want to kill literally everyone that knew how to. Maybe I wasn't clear, but he didn't want to kill literally everyone that could be able to farm.
Just enough Ukrainians over so that they could still farm.
It wasn't like we need to kill X amount of Ukrainians so that we can still have enough people to farm. It was, we're going to kill enough of them so that they're not going to be able to fight back.
Okay, so how do you explain the fact that they fought back during the Second World War?
They didn't fight back very well because they didn't. Did they end up breaking away? Like, what is the point of that question?
Did they end up breaking away? No, because and the Banderists lost, but of course the Banderists.
Yes, Germany invaded.
But the Second World War happened far after. Just real quick, the Holodomor was in 32-33, right? Correct? Am I wrong?
Yes.
The World War II was
the invasion wasn't
quite a bit after that. Germany they had already broken their spirits. No.
8 years later. So my point is, 8 years later, I guess Stalin didn't do a very good job of killing all of his potential enemies, such that within 8 years they would rise up against.
You realize that that's not an argument against anything that I just said. Oh, no, they weren't good enough at killing all the people that had an anti-Soviet notion. Therefore, it wasn't a genocide.
No. You made the argument. I asked you, why would Stalin have stopped this policy right when the famine ended, coincidentally, if his goal was to just crush all nationalist sentiment? And you said, well, because he stopped, because he succeeded. There was no threats to his power. And I'm saying if there were no threats to his power and he crushed all nationalist sentiment, why was there a huge nationalist movement 8 years later?
Like the Soviet Union, they starved them to death. They just weren't going to fight back in the way that they had been, there were a bunch of
before.
Wait, what?
Was Bandera not a nationalist before 1941?
What relevance does that have to what we're talking about?
That would mean
this is a massive cope argument that, because he didn't literally kill all nationalists, therefore it couldn't have possibly have been a genocide. This is like saying that, because the Germans didn't literally kill all of the Jews, therefore they didn't commit a genocide. They weren't successful in their ultimate goal.
It's not necessary. What I'm saying is
it's because this is a cope argument.
Let him respond. Let Nonsmoker respond to this, and then we're probably going to transition to closing statements then, because gang. But yeah, respond, please.
Yeah. Okay. So, I actually just had to double check just for the hell of it. Bandera was born in 1909. He was around a long time before the Holodomor, right? And my argument is that the core Ukrainian nationalist movement survived this supposed effort by Stalin to crush it. So doesn't that, okay, what it doesn't prove is that, the famine wasn't effective at stopping nationalism necessarily. But what it does not, what I guess the question it brings us back to is, why would Stalin suddenly stop all of these efforts to punish Ukraine once the famine ended if there was an obvious nationalist movement that still existed in Ukraine?
Can you prove that there was an obvious nationalist sentiment still in Ukraine after the Holodomor? That they were still capable of uprising? Did the amount of were there as many nationalist or riotous or uprisings? Because on the article that I had sent you earlier, there is a list of how many leading up to the Holodomor, incidents of riots and uprisings and, anti-Soviet, direct actions against them versus the amount after. And there was a noted decrease in a significant decrease in the amount of violent actions towards the Soviets after the Holodomor because they didn't have the means to fight back anymore.
So, yes, in fact, there was a major Ukrainian nationalist movement that survived not only after the Holodomor, but well past the Second World War. That happens to be because a lot of these groups were operating from outside the borders of the Soviet Union. So the OUN, or Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, did most of its operations out of Poland and then oftentimes in the United States. They had newspapers in the United States spreading pro-Ukrainian propaganda and all over Europe and into Canada. In fact, their official paper, or one of these official papers, Svoboda, I can't pronounce Ukrainian, I'm sorry, the Truth basically, was actually banned in Canada during the Second World War for promoting Nazism. But the point here is that Ukrainian nationalism, no matter what Stalin did in Ukraine, wouldn't have been crushed there because it was a phenomena that spread beyond the borders. There's nothing Stalin could have done to stop Ukrainian nationalism. So the idea that he implemented these policies to try and do so is a total fallacy. It's not even something that was possible or remotely possible.
Sorry, Wick. You said that we were going to move to closing statements. I didn't want to step
Oh.
over your moderator stuff.
No,
but
I mean,
want to
like,
say,
I want to let this back and forth
I
go.
can. Okay, so I can continue. Okay, cool.
Yeah, you can
so,
continue.
the idea.
But I'm just
the
warning you.
idea-
We got about 10 minutes. Before.
Okay, gotcha. I thought that you were going to stop me as soon as I started talking. So the idea that because Stalin didn't literally kill all nationalists all over the world doesn't mean, or means that there was no genocide during the Holodomor is. And you know that, and I know that. And it was the stupidest point for you to bring up. The idea that after the Holodomor, there wouldn't still be secret people that wanted to break away from the Soviet Union, like that they would all magically be killed. No, that's not what genocide is. That you're 100%, successful in all of your goals for the genocide. All that needs to be proven is that there was intent, that they did the mass killings or the deprivation of life, happiness, whatever, right? That we both agree on the definition of the UN Convention on Genocide, right? All we have to show is that that happened. It doesn't mean that they have to kill literal. I'm sorry. Yes, that's what genocide is, that we agreed on at the beginning of this debate, was that the Genocide Convention UN definition, that we have to kill them in whole or in part, that we're going to target a national or ethnical or racial or religious group.
Intent. There was no intent.
Despite showing that, I guess this is going to be our closing statements, because now we're like looping all over the place, because you coped about saying that there were Canadian Ukrainians that were still nationalists that didn't starve to death in Ukraine, so therefore there was no genocide in Ukraine, which is the biggest cope I've ever heard in my entire life. But I mean, at the end of the day, we can look at the collection. We can look at the collection of all these policies that were implemented in some measure across all of Russia. I'm not going to lie about that. That did happen. There were blacklists that happened in other places. There were people that were sent to gulags in other places. But where were they implemented the strongest? Where were they implemented to a degree that starved the people to death at a calculated rate? Only in Ukraine and the North Caucasus, places where the largest concentration of ethnic Ukrainians were. Why did this happen? Because Stalin and his cronies, like Molotov and the other guy that I mentioned, had to be sent over to the North Caucasus and to Ukraine to lead the NKVD, the special police, and all of these. I'm doing this as my closing statement. We can look at the.
I don't get to respond and make a separate closing statement.
I would assume that you would respond in your closing statement.
No, I have a response to the specific things you're saying, and I have a broader closing statement on the whole debate.
You can do it both as soon as the console is done.
Yeah, like the frustrating thing in this is, unlike the Holocaust for some reason, because everyone agrees that the Holocaust is a genocide, and it would be Holocaust denial not to do it, and everyone hates Holocaust deniers. For some reason, Holodomor genocide deniers will never ever take anything less than Stalin sending out a telegram saying, I want to kill as many Ukrainians as possible. I want to literally rape, kill, purge, and murder everyone that has a nationalist sentiment outside of Soviet nationalism. Like, that is the only standard of proof. Again, the last time I talked to Nonsmoker about this, I asked him, is that what your standard of proof is? Or if I have, enough circumstantial evidence around it, and a quote from Stalin saying that there was too much nationalist sentiment in Ukraine, will that be enough? And he said yes. And I feel like I've proven that here in this by citing sources, by linking these sources, and all of that.
Okay. Non-smoker, take it away.
Holy shit, dude. I feel like it might be better not to respond to that whole tangent, but I do want to at least mention we were talking about Ukrainian nationalism. And my question was if Stalin, his intention in being, extra punitive in the Ukraine was proof that he was trying to crush Ukrainian nationalism, how can you account for the fact that A, he stopped being punitive at the end of the famine, despite the fact that nationalists were functioning primarily outside of Ukraine, and then B, how you can account for the fact that Stalin showed no interest in resuming any kind of campaign against Ukrainian nationalism between the time the Holodomor ended and the start of the Second World War, where Ukrainian nationalism almost became partially the undoing of the Soviet Union. Sounds like really poor planning from a guy who was obsessively planning nearly everything he did. Um, but if anybody in the audience doesn't believe me on that, something to consider is that 1933 memo we talked about earlier. One of the reasons Stalin supposedly was concerned about Ukrainian peasant movement was because he said that they are being, contacted or influenced by forces outside of Ukraine, outside of the Soviet Union, within Poland. What he was referring to is the OUN. Stalin was well aware that the OUN was a massive reaching network that functioned primarily outside the confines of the Soviet Union. So Stalin would have also known that no matter how many punitive measures he took, he wouldn't have stopped Ukrainian nationalism because the networks were beyond his control. So it's not proof that A, Stalin wanted to crush Ukrainian nationalism completely through punitive policy because he knew that wasn't possible. And B, it's nowhere near proof that Stalin wanted to commit a genocide in Ukraine. There's no proof of that, in fact. There's tons and tons and tons of scholarship on this, and any serious person can read it and they'll come to the same conclusion that I did. What you can find if you want to scour the internet in a very surface level way is a bunch of articles written by Westerners that confirm your political narrative that seem to match up with this idea that the Soviet Union is Germany and it's all the same. Some authors have actually literally written that. And it's total.
It all comes down to propaganda.
Okay, so, dude, you have such a problem letting people finish a statement, and it demonstrates your like a serious insecurity with your argument. You clearly have no idea what you're talking about. You've never read a book on this. You scoured the internet for.
I'm the only one that cited sources this entire debate.
Let him finish his closing statement.
I'm sorry, he's insulting me right now. I'm the one that linked every single article, read quotes the entire time. Okay? He's the one that like coped at the end, saying that we didn't murder literally every, or the USSR didn't murder literally every single Ukrainian in the entire world.
Stop. Okay, but for real, stop. Let him finish his closing statement, then you can go in.
Yeah. Maybe you didn't hear me over all the talking you did. I cited multiple sources. I cited.
You never linked any of them.
I cited Stalin. I cited actual primary sources. I cited Stephen.
So did I, and yet you're saying that I never read anything.
You want me to go down the?
Yes, chat, this is apparently closing statements, but I don't know if it is. But go ahead.
John Archibald Getty, Togger, Davies and Wheatcroft, Michael Ellman, Hiroki Kuromiya, Ronald Grigorsuni, Stephen Kotkin. Primary sources from Stalin, primary sources from party officials, Stanislaw Kosier.
Do I get to respond by reading off the name of every single person that I cited?
Finish his closing statement or we'll never finish.
You aren't listening. Because you're too dense and too committed to spouting political bullshit that if you listen to some sources and you listen to some other arguments, your entire worldview falls apart and you can't handle that. So you have to keep filibustering and talking over me and not listening or engaging.
I'm waiting for you to finish your statement. If we look at the, do you want to bet money? Do you want to bet money right now who spoke more in this debate?
Interrupting.
Do you want to bet money on that?
Sansel, you have become Haas. You have become the person who is.
Hey, I'm not the one doing a genocide denial right now. So, like,
your moment, turn around and you realize, holy shit, I'm actually the screeching psycho. Right?
I'm waiting for you to finish. Instead of doing a closing statement, you're reading off like 40 names.
Taken a massive L again, and you've, dude, in my experience, you've never won a single debate.
Ever.
Anyone that I've ever watched, not a single one. Not even ones that we've had. Let's expand it out to every single interaction you've ever had online. You're a total clueless moron.
This is the cope of someone that is so insecure in his ideas and all of his sources that he instead has to say that I've never won a debate literally ever.
I just want to remind the chat he'll never be a teacher, no matter.
Oh, so now we're insulting my future. Okay, cool, buddy. Like, what the is this even supposed to be? What kind of argument is
I
this?
wouldn't trust you to sub my students.
Oh wow! Oh, I'm so hurt.
Okay, well, I don't know what happened.
I would hate to be one of your students because then I'd be a tanky.
What I would love.
At least I have students, something you never will, because no one would ever pay you to.
Oh no!
Brain dead idiot.
Oh no! I'm a high school teacher and I'm at the pinnacle of my life, balding and tanky, right? And I'm going to insult someone that has way more potential in his life that could go into multiple.
Where are you going with this?
I mean, I have multiple job prospects in policy writing and in teaching in multiple different states right now.
And no real job. It's going
I have a real job right now.
Does Sansol suck ass? And here we have someone who obviously says yes, Sansol sucks ass and has no future, versus Sansol who says, actually, wait, guys, I do have a future. Who will win? I don't know. But this is a fun debate, so continue, please.
Well, there's a unanimous agreement.
Wait, are we continuing, or was that closing statements?
I thought that was closing statements, but you decided to yell at each other.
He just wants to tell me that I have no future, which is not an argument for anything that we said.
A bunch of ad hom to me too. It's fine.
Yo, if we're doing a roast session,
if
we're doing a roast session, we got some people who wants to come in. Thank you, $2.
If we're gonna bring people in,
fondue.
can I run to the bathroom?
Here's some money for the wrap up music fund. Oh, thank you for the $2. But yeah, if you want to roast either of these, if you want to roast Sansol, jump on in while he goes to the bathroom. If you are here to roast Sansol, we can open it up for that. But before we do that, I want to give you each a chance to plug yourselves. Where can they find you, Nonsmoker?
Yeah, multiple places. You can find me at twitch.tv/struggle session radio. You can catch me on WUSB 90.1 FM in Stony Brook. I host a radio show there every other Monday, 8 to 10. You can find the link in my bio on Twitter. You can find me on Twitter at Twitter or x.com/nonsmoker. Both O's are zeros.
Sansol, where can they find you?
Sansol on basically every platform except for Twitter, and which you can find my friend, Easy Gamer GG.
Okay, and with that, go to the restroom. And if you wanna have questions for either of these gentlemen or just roast them, we'll do a brief Q&A. Brief. So jump backstage, ! Discord chat. My mods can put the Discord links if that doesn't work, and we'll do that. So yeah. I don't know what happened at the end there. Very respectful up until then, but yeah, just.
Well, I mean, if I could just say a word on that, the reason I snapped, and listen, was some of that stuff out of line? I acknowledge it was, but the fact of the matter is, Wick, I mean, this guy has a serious issue letting me finish a thought, and I acknowledge I'm a little long-winded, but I think to have a conversation, even if someone is long-winded, you have to give them the ability to fully respond before jabbering about some other point. And Sansol has a serious problem. Listen, I honestly don't think he's a stupid guy. All right, maybe a little bit. But he has this major problem of gish galloping. He jams as many arguments into a statement as possible and makes it such that you really can't respond. And by the time you try to respond to each point, he's making another argument.
Hello.
Whoa, your mic. I don't know what's up with that, but fix it.
Uh-oh. Is this better?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know what happened.
And we can't
Anyway,
see your camera's being weird too. But your camera doesn't matter.
It always does that. I don't know why. No, yeah, just want to check in with this Howard Zinn wannabe. Why do you think that so many people disagree with the fact that you're long, eloquent, nonsensical, just going on giant diatribes with not saying anything, trying to back a genocidal authoritarian regime? Why is that okay? Why do you see why you get a lot of pushback on that?
Lots of people agree with me.
Holy shit, you didn't hear anything I said.
You asked me literally, why do so many people not agree with me? And I'm saying lots of people agree with me.
Yeah. No, you're wrong. That's not okay. A lot of people agree with you. Most people disagree with you. Correct?
I don't know. Can you prove that?
See, this is stupid. This is what you do. You always, during this entire debate, you went from
So you
giant
can't.
macro scale to when you got a little bit of pushback. We have to get a microscope to put any sort of analysis behind your statements. It is disgusting debate tactic. It is actually, I can't believe that
Okay.
people don't call
Okay.
you out more on this.
Okay.
So you can.
Let him respond. Non-smoker, what's your response to the fact that
All
you
right, let's
have
put the
disgusting...
2-minute timer for his response. Go ahead.
This is a very triggered man. I don't know. Something bad must have happened to him today.
Yeah, I had to listen to this debate with you. God damn.
Maybe you should
Go on. You got 2 minutes to respond. Go ahead. Take your time, as you always do.
That's all the time I need, dude. You're saying nothing of substance.
Oh, you poor baby.
Do you have any other questions?
Sansol, I appreciate you doing what you incredibly trying to like talk to a brick wall. These people, especially tankies, are so dense. They cannot, their religious ideology is so difficult to speak with them because they will not take any pushback, and they see it as to defy the laws of physics to become a black hole itself where light, it does not escape. They cannot get anything through their thick skulls. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Okay.
Oh, you want to say something? Go ahead.
Can I just point out that you're actually upset because someone's giving pushback on your worldview?
No, not at all. I was here to listen to some good points from a person that supposedly is somewhat of an authoritative figure on this, and instead I got to hear somebody go on and on about nothing, and then when asked one follow-up question, oh, you interrupted me. How dare you? You're
Okay.
No, that's literally what happened.
Okay.
All right.
Well, my friend, I'll see you later.
Thanks, Wick. Bye.
Schizo lib moment?
I need a microphone like that.
Please no. That microphone was awful. But yeah,
Thank you for the historical one.
fair enough. Interesting points. If you're in the audience and you have a thought, or if you have an opinion, or if you want to spout off for a few minutes, again, very briefly, we're having open call-ins. So click that Discord link, jump backstage, I'll pull you in. Majin, I see you yelling in chat, but you got to come in the backstage or I can't pull you in. So there you go. But yeah, I as we were saying, I was saying to Non-Smoker while you were in the bathroom, like at the end there, it kind of went off the rails. Why do you think it went off the rails?
I think there's probably two reasons. The first one is that he towards the end, I feel like he didn't really have much of a response to the thing that I had to say. So instead, he had to move away to like the broader world Ukrainian nationalist movement. Granted, all of the people that like fled Ukraine for a reason, and that was because they were starving to death. But you know, so that's one. And on the other hand, every single time he decides to go ultra, oh my God, please! He asked me a question, non-smoker. Oh.
And I didn't yell at you till way after that.
And this is what my second reason that it went off the rails is that every single time he decides to go aggro on me is when he is feeling super threatened by what I'm saying. Well, now now he feels the need to ultra interrupt, huh?
Dude, you did that to me the whole debate.
I did not do that to you the entire debate. Again, do you want to put money down on who spoke more?
Everybody agrees. You won't shut.
How much? Okay, if everyone agrees, do you want to put $20 down?
As a dirty centrist.
Hold on, I want to make money. Rick, let me make money.
I will say.
How much money would you put down?
There's two different questions being asked. Did Sansol interrupt? And who spoke more? These are two different questions.
Yeah, I want to know who spoke more.
Are you asking me or the?
Yeah, I'm asking. Do you think you spoke more, or do you think I spoke more?
I really don't know who spoke more. I think I was cut off almost every time I tried to answer.
Do you think that the reason that I might have like tried to interject is to either like ask a clarifying question or try to focus on one point at a time rather than have you go off on 5-minute long tangents where I can't respond to everything?
Do you think interrupting with further questions as I try to answer the initial
if they're clarifying questions, yes. Yes,
you're
because
doing
I know what you're asking.
Dude, you
If they're
don't know what I'm
clarifying
asking.
questions, I do know
Dude,
what you're
you're
asking. If I'm
so
asking a
you're
clarifying question, I think it's totally valid. I think it's totally
You have
valid to
no
ask a
idea.
clarifying.
You're so ideologically
Okay, ask me the question. Let me see if it's the exact thing that I think you're about to ask me. Go ahead.
Okay, so what I was going to say is, don't you think it's valid in a debate to allow your opponent ample time to address all of the questions you ask them without assuming, first of all, that you know what their answer is, A, and B, that you can interject and throw another question at them, thus trying to dirty the waters by overwhelming the person with questions, such that, they're so busy trying to answer you that they can't actually make points themselves or ask you questions. Kind of seems like
So
you're
the,
not interested in having a discussion. Kind of seems like you're interested in trying to just frustrate me because you really don't know what the fuck you're talking about.
okay, so you just did exactly what I was. Well, number one, that was the exact question that I was going to answer. Thank you very much. And number two, like this, you're doing exactly what is the problem. Holy shit, you're so scared for me to respond.
I know, yeah. That's kind of how it feels from the other end.
Okay,
so
Infallible Al,
the reason
our guest...
here's no, I just want to like let Nonsmoker know something that yeah, it is totally valid to interrupt someone to ask a clarifying question to make sure that we're both on the same page, either definitionally or conceptually. And number two, yes, it is totally valid to interrupt someone when they're going off on a 5-minute long spiel and doing a debate tactic known as a gish gallop, bringing up a bunch of irrelevant points so that I can respond to one at a time, ask you a question, and then you bring up 5 more points. Yes, it is totally valid to try and stick to one point at a time.
Infallible Al, you are here. You have the floor. What's your question or your comment, please?
It's foul. There's an F.
Oh, sorry. Infallible foul.
Well, I just want to say, first off, Sansol, congratulations on your potential possible aspect or
prospects.
Oh God, prospects. It's been.
I appreciate it, buddy.
Yeah, it's been a while. We're healing though. We're healing. Nonsmoker, you're aware that like when this country was founded, America, that there was a genocide, I could say, of maybe the native population here, right?
Yes.
Do you think Americans are bound to defend that because they're capitalists and they think because they want to believe in capitalist policies, we have to defend the fact that our country did that? Or can we say, yeah, that was fucked up, they shouldn't have done that?
I don't think Americans are bound to doing that. I think people do defend it for that exact reason, though.
Well, that's why I'm wondering why exactly, because you defend Stalin, you can actually, say like, okay, I believe in these principles without saying like, oh, but Stalin was a good guy. When it's proof
I
that he would.
I never said Stalin was a good guy.
But you.
He's just. He's not a bad guy. He's just that accidentally starved of like multiple millions of people.
I can say this: if Sansol ran the Soviet Union, way more people would have died.
I mean,
I
maybe.
I don't know what to even say to that. Yeah, I'm not a world leader, and I also probably wouldn't like run the country by like iron fist and try to starve a bunch of people. I probably wouldn't try to do a bunch of collective farming.
It's possible that there was a major failure in agricultural policy that he was too arrogant to acknowledge and resolve.
They recognized that there was starvation in Ukraine. It wasn't a mystery to him.
Why do you think he's done bad things, but you think that wasn't one of them?
No, I think actually the way he handled the entire famine was horrible. It was one of the worst things probably the worst thing he ever did by a pretty.
But you don't think it was malicious?
No, I think it was very malicious. I just don't think it constitutes a genocide.
Implies intent. Do you realize the words that you're using?
Yeah, so Sansol, this is what we keep getting stuck on, dude. Intent, meaning he intended to do the things that he did specifically to wipe out Ukraine or Ukrainians or Ukrainian statehood. There's no evidence of that. There's just
wiping out Ukrainian statehood is not part of genocide.
Okay, well, that was an argument you made in our last discussion, that you felt as though genocide was somehow the denial.
I've never said that before in my life.
Then let's just forget it. I have a VOD of you saying it, but Let's
Well,
I've
you said
never said that
Native
destroying a
Americans were
nation.
genocided, and no one really wanted to
Nationality.
just wipe them out. We just wanted to move them west.
Well, the difference primarily there is, first of all, there were many people who absolutely wanted to kill off all of the natives and denativize the land. I mean, Andrew Jackson, I mean, several different notable events in American history indicate large population movements specifically to ensure white settlement in native areas. But even if you just want to remove, exact intent in that case, how about the actual murder of people, both by weapons and biological means, which were intentionally spread to try and kill as many natives as possible? There's no proof whatsoever that Stalin wanted to kill as many Ukrainians as possible.
That's
The
Anything
fact that
else
they
to
died
follow?
didn't mean that he intended to kill as many Ukrainians as he could. Actually, he probably could have killed way more if he wanted to.
Okay. Anything else infallible?
no, I think that's it.
Hey, thank you for coming in. It's a pleasure to see you.
See, why couldn't we have that discussed? There's a respectful, normal human.
Why aren't you a respectful, normal human, Sansel? Delvin?
I guess it's because I have no prospects in life, Wick. I'm just such a sad,
Have you considered
lonely
moving to
person.
Canada?
Also, I'm
They
just
have
being
a
an idiot.
healthcare system,
You have
right?
prospects. I'm being a dick. I'm sorry. But I can't stand when you interrupt me. It drives me nuts. But you're a good
Again,
guy.
listen, we can break bread here. Again, the only times I will interrupt, like intentionally, is when I feel like you're going on for a long time and not answering the question, meaning that it is, again, like I brought up earlier, a gish gallop. There's a bunch of points being brought up, not answering the question, but bringing up a million things that I have to respond to and cannot respond to because I'm trying to get down to the meat of one question, which is why I repeated questions multiple times while interrupting you, which is why I said I want to focus on this thing right here. That's why that's the only times I will interrupt intentionally. If I interrupt unintentionally, like I did multiple times in this debate, you can see it. You can go back in the VOD. I'll say, sorry, yep, keep going.
Okay, gang. Doesn't look like we have any more callers. Thank you for those who called in. I do want to watch some TV and get some food in my tummy. What we got coming up, gang? Tomorrow, Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern, we're going to have a discussion with Turkey Tom, Flow Trace, Reservoir, and maybe one or two others on copyright and React content. Is the way that React content done ethical? Is copyright necessary to have creative endeavors, creative projects, or is copyright getting in the way? We're going to talk about that. It'll be fun. Check us out, 6 p.m. Eastern tomorrow. Gang, if you like this content, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. If you're on Kick, hit that follow button. Are either of you streaming on Kick?
I am.
Hey,
Twitch,
give me a
What's
minute.
my
I'm gonna try
username? Do you really have to ask what my username is, Wick?
No, I was about to, but I realized my mistake. But I kind of might have to ask how to fucking
Say my name, Wick.
how to
Say
rate you
my
is an
name.
issue. Is it host channel?
I honestly have no clue.
Okay, I'm gonna try. Boom. Okay, there you go. I think
I
this is
appreciate
what it does. But anyway, I'll see you guys later. Bye.
Well, welcome. For people that are new, if you're watching on YouTube or if you're watching on Kick, I'm Sansol. I am a political science student. I like to talk about politics. I like to argue about politics. We talk about all sorts of fun things on here like drama and politics. And I like to argue with people in chat about a lot of different things. Like, comment, and subscribe. I don't like to shill. Also,